She wasn't meant to rule, just marry, bear heirs, and vanish. But when France tore itself apart in a war of faith and blood, Catherine de' Medici stepped into the void. They called her a poisoner, a puppet master, a queen cloaked in black. This is the story of how one woman held a dying kingdom together, and how a calculated monster held France together with nothing but fear and cunning. Long before she was feared, long before she was accused of mass murder or whispered about in candlelit rooms, Catherine de' Medici was a nobody. The girl whose name held the weight of one of Europe's richest dynasties, but who lived her early years without protection, without power, and without any promise of survival. She was born in 1519 and into the house of Medici. But the birthright was hollow. Her parents were dead before she could remember their faces. Her father, Lorenzo de' Medici, had been a ruler of Florence, but by the time she was born, the Medicis had fallen from grace. Enemies of the family seized power, and Florence turned against them. She was 3 when the palace was stormed. Armed men came for her. She was dragged from her bed by mercenaries and marched through the streets as a hostage. At one point, the rebels debated executing her publicly. Her survival was not due to mercy, but usefulness. She had value as a political token, nothing more. While other royal children were raised in silk, Catherine was stashed in convents, hidden from assassins, and passed between powerful relatives like an inconvenient secret. She learned early what it meant to be powerless, and she never forgot it. By the time she was 14, her future was once again being bargained over by men in clerical robes and royal chambers. This time, Pope Clement VII, her relative and benefactor, arranged something extraordinary. She was to be married into the French royal family. The boy was Henry, Duke of Orléans, second son to King Francis III of France. It was not a romantic match. It was a transaction. France wanted money. The Medici coffers were deep, and Catherine, quiet and expendable, would seal the deal. She arrived in France as a foreigner with a powerful name but no allies. She spoke carefully, observed everything, and betrayed nothing. Her husband, Henry, ignored her from the start. He loved another woman, Diane de Poitiers, nearly 20 years his senior, whom he kept at his side always, even parading her before the court as a surrogate queen. Catherine was sidelined, mocked for her Italian blood, dismissed for failing to bear children. Years passed. Catherine endured public humiliation, whispered accusations of infertility, and constant courtly games. But she said nothing. She watched. After a decade, she finally gave birth, not just to one heir, but to 10 children in total, including 3 future kings of France. Her position, once so precarious, became cemented by blood. Then everything changed in a moment. King Francis died. Henry, the disinterested husband who had barely tolerated her, became king. Diane de Poitiers remained his obsession, and Catherine was once again reduced to a figurehead, a mother for heirs and little else. She smiled for portraits. She danced at state functions. But behind closed doors, she read state documents, memorized maps, studied political factions. She was no longer the girl in the convent. She had learned how power moved. Then came the day the lance struck. In 1559, during a jousting tournament celebrating a political alliance, King Henry II rode into the lists in golden armor. His opponent's lance shattered, and a shard pierced Henry's eye. He lingered in agony for 10 days before finally dying, blind and fevered. Suddenly, Catherine was no longer the sidelined wife. She was the queen mother to a child king, Francis II, only 15 years old. And this time, she had no intention of stepping aside. Francis, weak-willed and sickly, was quickly overwhelmed by the Guise family, ultra-Catholic nobles with deep influence and ruthless ambition. They seized control of the court, acting as power behind the throne. Catherine, again, was pushed aside, but she did not resist publicly. She waited. When Francis died the following year, she acted. Her next son, Charles IX, was only 10 years old. A true child. That meant regency, and this time, the regent would be her. Catherine moved quickly. She reshuffled the court. She brought in Protestant advisors to balance the Catholic Guises. She presented herself as a peacemaker, a motherly figure trying to hold France together. But underneath, she was carefully building something far more enduring: her control. France, at the time, was splintered. The Protestant Reformation had taken root. The Catholic establishment was panicking. Civil war loomed. Catherine knew that religion was just the fuel. The real fire was power. So she fed both sides, just enough to keep them fighting each other and not her. She arranged marriages, brokered ceasefires, bribed nobles. Her court became a theater, and she its quiet director, using diplomacy as a knife and her children as pawns. But even she could not keep the fires down forever. By 1562, war erupted. The French Wars of Religion, a brutal, decades-long struggle between Protestants and Catholics, began to consume the country. Catherine blamed the extremists on both sides. But more and more, her actions were condemned by both camps. The Protestants accused her of betrayal. The Catholics accused her of softness. And her own son, Charles IX, struggled under the weight of the crown. Catherine responded by tightening her grip. She employed spies, poisoners, astrologers, anything that gave her even the slightest edge. She used fear where diplomacy failed. And as the years passed, the stories about her grew darker. People whispered that she kept dead men's skulls in her chambers, that she practiced black magic, that she had her enemies poisoned with invisible powders. The truth was more banal and more terrifying. She didn't need witchcraft. She had power, and she wielded it without remorse. In public, she remained the grieving widow, the devoted mother. But in private, she was something else entirely: a tactician, a woman who had built her survival on learning when to wait and when to strike. And her greatest strike was yet to come. In the summer of 1572, Paris shimmered with uneasy celebration. Banners flew, bells rang. The cobbled streets teemed with onlookers. A royal wedding was about to take place, one meant to heal the wounds of France's endless civil war. On paper, it was brilliant. Catherine had arranged for her daughter, Marguerite de Valois, a Catholic, to marry Henry of Navarre, a prominent Protestant leader. The union was meant to signal peace, a symbolic end to a decade of bloodshed. Protestants traveled from every corner of the country to witness the moment. Their leaders came with hope, but beneath the silks and ceremony, the city was a tinderbox. Catherine had not forgotten the violence. She had seen her son Charles IX deteriorate under the strain of leadership. The boy she once cradled was now a trembling, paranoid king. His mind frayed, his hands shook, and his mood swung violently. He trusted no one, not even her. And he especially feared the Huguenots, the French Protestants, who were growing bolder with every political concession. Catherine watched her son closely. She knew his fears. She knew what voices haunted him in the night. And she knew how to guide them. Just days after the wedding, Admiral Gaspard de Coligny, a Protestant war hero and one of the most influential men in France, was shot in the street by an assassin. He survived, barely. Rumors flew through Paris. Was it the Guise family? Was it revenge? Was it Catherine? The truth may never be known. But what followed was undeniable. The Protestant leaders, outraged, demanded justice. The Catholic elite grew restless. Tension exploded behind palace walls. Charles IX veered toward collapse, pacing, screaming, unsure who to trust. And Catherine, ever the mother, offered a chilling solution. Strike them before they strike you. She didn't have to order the massacre. She just had to release the pressure. On August 24th, 1572, the feast of St. Bartholomew, the bells tolled at dawn. Catholic militia flooded into Protestant neighborhoods. Doors were kicked in, men were dragged from beds and murdered in the streets. Bodies filled the Seine. Coligny was thrown from a window and dismembered. The bloodshed lasted for days. By some estimates, over 3,000 Protestants were killed in Paris alone. Thousands more across France in the following weeks. It was not just an assassination, it was annihilation. And at the center of it all stood Catherine. She claimed it was spontaneous, that she had tried to prevent it. But few believed her. Diplomats wrote of her iron will. Foreign courts called her a butcher. And within France, the myth of the Black Queen began to take root. A woman so cold, so cunning, she would bathe her kingdom in blood just to keep the throne. Her daughter, Marguerite, survived the massacre, trapped in the Louvre, screaming as the walls ran red. Her new husband, Henry of Navarre, was spared, but only after converting to Catholicism at sword point. He would later escape, return to Protestantism, and eventually become king. But for now, he was Catherine's hostage. Charles IX never recovered. Guilt consumed him. He suffered fevers, nightmares, fits of weeping. In one episode, he claimed he could hear the screams of murdered children in his ears. Less than 2 years later, he was dead, coughing blood and raving. Some said he died of tuberculosis. Others said it was the weight of his soul. With Charles gone, Catherine crowned her third son, Henry III, a more capable ruler, but no less fragile. Handsome, intelligent, but plagued by indecision. He had lived in Poland as king for a time and returned to France reluctantly, aware of the fate that awaited a monarch in such a broken land. Again, Catherine stood behind the throne. But France had changed. The massacre had not brought peace. It had fractured the country even further. Protestant armies rose in vengeance. Catholic hardliners, appalled by the crown's weakness, formed the Catholic League, a movement more loyal to God than king. Catherine found herself surrounded by enemies she had once fed. Still, she played her part. She brokered deals, wrote hundreds of letters, traveled across France in royal processions, dragging her failing sons with her like props in a crumbling theater. The mother of kings, reduced to a traveling show, still trying to hold the center while everything cracked around her. At court, the whispers grew louder. She was blamed for everything: the wars, the deaths, the decay. Her Italian origins were mocked, her reliance on astrologers and poisons exaggerated into legend. Some claimed she had a cabinet of death, filled with deadly perfumes and cursed rings. In truth, Catherine rarely needed superstition. She used leverage, secrets, and fear. One of her last political efforts was to reconcile her son Henry III with Henry of Navarre, now a Protestant military leader with growing support. But it was too late. The League declared Henry III a heretic. Civil war erupted again. In 1588, Catherine stood in a cold palace, watching everything she built unravel. Her allies were gone, Her enemies were emboldened, and her health was failing. She died the next year, not by poison or blade, but by natural causes. Quietly, unceremoniously. A woman who had ruled France from the shadows for 30 years, now left with no tomb, no state funeral, and little praise. Her death passed almost unnoticed in the chaos. Her son, Henry III, was assassinated months later, and France was left without a king. Catherine de' Medici never wore the crown in her own name, and when she died in 1589, her kingdom was already unraveling. Foreign courts remembered her not as a queen or mother, but as a poisoner, the dark queen of Renaissance France. She was blamed for the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre, for the failed marriages, for the collapse of Valois power. Her name became synonymous with manipulation, secrecy, and cold ambition. She had lied to her children. She had watched men die by her silent command. She had orchestrated marriages that were political traps and tolerated violence when it served the throne. She bent morality around necessity, convinced that the survival of the monarchy required hard choices, and that blood, when spilled, could be justified if it preserved peace. An orphaned Florentine who arrived in France as little more than a bargaining chip. A foreign queen scorned by her husband, isolated by nobility, and mocked for her lineage. She endured humiliation, exile, and obscurity, then rose to hold a kingdom together through the most violent religious conflict Europe had seen in centuries. What's certain is that Catherine de' Medici helped shape one of the most violent and transformative periods in French history. Her fingerprints are on every marriage alliance, every civil war treaty, every bloody uprising that scarred the country in the 16th century. Future rulers would study her methods. Women in power would be compared to her, often unfairly. And the kingdom she tried so desperately to hold together would go on bleeding for another generation. Until Henry IV, her reluctant son-in-law, finally restored stability by doing what none of her sons could, putting the country above the crown. Catherine never ruled as queen regnant, but she reigned through blood, marriage, and will alone, not remembered with reverence, but never forgotten. A queen in the shadows who might have played her role too well. If you made it this far and enjoyed the video, please don't forget to like and subscribe. If you want to hear a specific story, comment below for a chance for it to be featured.